Hello and welcome to Gefet Gemara. I'm Yael Shimoni, bringing to you together with Fadran in Yeshivat Drisha, learning Iyun in your Q Daf Yomi. And today we're going to talk about a fascinating sugya, a very interesting machloket you have here between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. And even though it looks as if their machloket is historically what happened when we were in the desert, when it comes to Shechita, but we will see today that this machloket really invokes deep thought about what happens when Am Yisrael enters Eretz Yisrael. And also in the question, what does Eretz Yisrael change in our observance of Torah? So I have a slight chiddush in this sugya, and this is going to be slightly longer than usual, but I think you will find this very, very, very special and interesting. And this machloket really evokes a lot of different questions. So I hope you'll go to the end. And if you have anything to say about my chiddush and these ideas, I'm more than happy to hear. So let's begin. And our machloket starts in the daf of Shabbos and daf Tet Zayin Amud Beis, and it goes into Zayin, what you're going to learn on Sunday. And in order to understand the machloket, we have to have a brief review of the psukim. So in the Varim Parashat Re'eh, we see that when we come to Eretz Yisrael, there is great concern in the psukim that we might decide not to bring our sacrifices to Beit HaMikdash. So it starts by saying, "Hishamar lecha pen ta'aleh olotecha bechol makom asher tir'eh. Ki im bamakom asher yibchar Hashem be'echad eshvatecha, sham ta'aleh olotecha v'sham ta'aseh kol asher ani mitzavcha." So first of all, if you have a korban, you have to bring it to Beit HaMikdash. Don't think that you can do it outside of Beit HaMikdash. And then another pasuk, רק בכל אהבת נפשך תסבח ואכלת בשר כברכת השם אלוקיך אשר נתן לך בכל שעריך הטמא והטהור יאכלנו כצבי וכאייל. So even though you can't sacrifice when you're far away from the temple, you can eat meat. You can take the same animal and shecht it and eat its meat and not bring it to become a korban. So if we'll go to pasuk chaf, which is what is going to be discussed in the Gemara, this pasuk says, "Ki yarchiv Hashem Elokecha et gvulcha kasher diber lach, ve'amarta ochla basar, ki ta'aveh nafshecha le'echol basar, v'chol ahavat nafshecha tochal basar." So this pasuk says, if you really want, if you have a taiva for meat, you can eat it anywhere in Israel. So the word ta'ava is also very strange here, and continues the psukim and say, "Ki yirchak mimcha makom asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha, וזבחת מבקריך ומצונך שנתן השם לך כאשר ציוויתיך ואכלת בשעריך בכל אהבת נפשך. אך כאשר יאכל את הצבי ואת היעל, כן תאכלנו הטמא והטהור יאכלנו יחדיו." So what we see in the psukim, that you can shecht and eat anywhere in Israel, and when you do that, you don't have to act as if it is a korban, because you can also eat it when you're tameh. Korbanot you can only eat when you're tahor, and you can eat this only when you're tameh. So obviously there was a difference between what happened in the desert and what's happening when we come into Eretz Yisrael. And this difference is in a machloket between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. So here in the Gemara, we approach this machloket because there's a question in the Mishnah that it says that you always have to shecht. Who's the one who has to say that? Leolam shochatim man ta'ana. This was in the Mishnah. So we're going to have a machloket here between Rabbah and Rav Yosef. Who's the Tana that has a hava amina, a slight thought that shechting is not forever? What are we talking about forever? So Am Yisrael went through 3 stages. It was in the desert, and then we went into Eretz Yisrael, and then we went out on Galut. Now we've returned. So the Gemara says that there's a hava amina that the change is only in Israel. And something changes when you were outside of Israel and when we return to Israel. That's the strong hava amina. And that's why the Mishnah had to say that even when we are in Galut, we are still chayav to shecht all animals. So what is this hava amina? And who's the Tana that has this hava amina? So Rabbah says, it's Rabbi Yishmael, the Tanya, "Ki yarchiv Hashem Elokecha et gvulcha kasher diber lach ve'amarta ochla basar." רבי ישמעאל אומר, לא בא כתוב אלא להתיר להם בשר תאווה, שבתחילה נאסר להם בשר תאווה, משנכנסו לארץ הותר להם בשר תאווה. So Rabbi Yishmael says, when we were in the desert, we were not allowed to eat basar tava. Okay? It sounds as if there's a problem in wanting to eat meat, and in the desert, you can't just do it. What do you do when you want to eat meat? You have to bring it as a korban. That's your only way of eating meat. So Rabbah says, if this is what Rabbi Yishmael is thinking, so maybe when we are leaving Eretz Yisrael on Galut, again, we will not be allowed to eat meat just like that because there's a problem of ta'ava. This heter of meat is only in Eretz Yisrael. That's why you have to say that this heter of shechting and not bringing as a korban is always. You can still eat meat even if you're not in Eretz Yisrael. Okay. Rav Yosef says, this doesn't make sense. Why doesn't it make sense? Because the whole concept of allowing you to eat meat, says Rav Yosef, is because when we entered Eretz Yisrael, we were far away from the temple. So when we're out in Galut, it's even further from the temple. Of course you can eat meat when you shecht it, when you're far away from Eretz Yisrael, because that's the whole idea. So who's the Tana who said Be'olam Shochatim? Rav Yosef says it's Rabbi Akiva. The Tanya, Rabbi Akiva Omer, כי ירחק ממך המקום אשר יבחר השם, לא בא כתוב אלא לאסור להם בשר נחירה, שבתחילה הותר להם בשר נחירה, משנכנסו לארץ נאסר להם בשר נחירה. So Rabbi Akiva has a totally different concept of what happened when we entered Eretz Yisrael. Well, first, he has a different concept about what happened in the desert. According to Rabbi Yishmael, of course we shechted all our animals in the desert. There was a special chumrah that you, in order to eat the meat, you had to bring it as a korban, but of course you shecht it. And according to Rabbi Akiva, actually, shechting was only part of bringing a korban. It's actually a part of the idea of a korban. And if you kill animals, even without shechting them, you're allowed to eat them in the desert. Meaning Shechita is part of a religious ceremony. And if you're not doing a religious thing with your animal, you just have to kill it and then eat it. You can eat things, eat animals, even though you didn't shech them in the desert. I think that's fascinating. I don't think before I read this from Rabbi Akiva, I didn't think that it could be that in the desert they were eating things that are not allowed to be eaten by me today. Anyway, that's what Rabbi Akiva says. And when we enter Eretz Yisrael, anything we want to eat, we have to shecht. It looks as if this religious concept of shechita spreads over all the animals, and there's something about Eretz Yisrael that has more kedusha and everything. We'll look at this presently again. So he says, Rav Yosef, he's the one who said lo olam shochatim, because we might have thought that this is only this spreading of kedusha is only in Eretz Yisrael. So when we leave Eretz Yisrael, there's no spreading of kedusha. We're back at being allowed to eat animals even without shechting them. So that's why you have to say no. Shechting is forever. Okay, the Gemara says, "B'ma kamipalge." Rabbi Akiva savar basar ta'ava lo ne'sar klal. According to Rabbi Akiva, there was never a problem with eating meat just for the sake of eating meat. That was always mutar. It was even more mutar before. But Rabbi Yishmael says, once we got the Torah, we had to shecht all the animals. We never ate animals without shechting them. So that's a machloket. Now the Gemara continues and asks about Rabbi Yishmael, because Rabbi Yishmael is actually the shita which is harder to understand. And the Gemara says, okay, we understand that for Rabbi Akiva, he never had a problem eating animals. So, okay, eating tzvi ayal, which are animals that are not behemot, they're not part of being a korban, of course you could eat them. But according to Rabbi Yishmael, if the problem is eating meat without shechting it, and eating meat without making it something religious, without bringing it as a korban, so why are you allowed in the desert to eat tzvi ve'ayal? If you have problem eating meat without bringing a korban, they will be totally out of bounds. Why? Because tzvi ve'ayal are not part of the animals that we can bring as a korban. So it makes sense in what Rabbi Yishmael said, that anything that you can bring as a korban you can eat, but if you can't bring it as a korban, it will be just asur. So that's what the Gemara asks. Rabbi Yishmael, tzvi ve'ayal gufei mihaveh shari. How could it be that you are allowed to eat them? So says the Gemara, no, you don't understand. So the Gemara says the whole Isser is only on the animals that you can bring in as a sacrifice. Okay, so what's going on here? There's a Hava Amina and there is a conclusion, right? What's the Hava Amina? According to Rabbi Yishmael, the problem is eating meat without bringing it as a korban. And therefore, anything that can't be a sacrifice could not be eaten. But the conclusion is that we didn't understand correctly. This whole concept is not about ta'ava, it's about something else. Because the whole Easter was only on these animals that could be sacrifices. Okay, we finished the Gemara, but now we're left with a ton of questions. When we look at these two deot, Rabbi Akiva makes more sense, even though at first glance he seems more surprising, but he makes more sense than Rabbi Yishmael. Let me explain why. Because Rabbi Akiva, we're shocked to discover that according to him, you could eat animals without shechting them in the desert. That's a little shocking, yeah. But once we get over that shock, we can understand what happened. Because in the desert, we weren't so religious, okay? The religiosity was less so than in Eretz Yisrael. Coming into Eretz Yisrael, we take this concept of Shechita that was only part of the korbanot. And we're saying, in Eretz Yisrael, all the food becomes a korban. Any meat is like a korban. It's not 100% korban, but it's closer than a korban than what it was. Because in the desert, really, there were a whole bunch of animals that Am Yisrael was no different than Gentiles. They were exactly the same. Coming to Eretz Yisrael, there's something about Eretz Yisrael that takes the Kedusha and makes it wider, and that's how we end up shechting all our animals. So this is an idea that I heard from Rabbi Yishmael Shimoni explaining Rabbi Akiva this way, but it makes a lot of sense that Eretz Yisrael is something that brings more kedusha into the lives of Am Yisrael when they go into it. Now Rabbi Yishmael, he's mamash mysterious. Why? Because it's very hard to understand if the problem is tava. Why make a difference between tzvi and Yael and behemot? That's one question. And two, if Rabbi Akiva thinks that coming to Eretz Yisrael adds kedusha, it seems as if Rabbi Yishmael thinks that coming to Eretz Yisrael makes you less kadosh because you had more boundaries in the desert than you have in Eretz Yisrael. So that's hard to understand. Yeah, coming into Eretz Yisrael makes us less religious in a sense. There's a mystery here in Rabbi Yishmael, and we'll take the Gefet to try to understand Rabbi Yishmael's Shita. And we'll begin in a classic way, working with Tosafot and Rashi. Okay? So Rashi, when he explains the Shita of Rabbi Yishmael, he adds more information that's not written in the Gemara. And this is a chiddush that Rashi has that Tosafot will attack in a moment. So Rashi explains in Rabbi Yishmael, what happens if somebody in the desert now doesn't abide the rule and takes a cow and shechts it and eats it? Okay? Does a barbecue. What is his punishment? Says Rashi, אם היו שוחטים בלא קורבן, היו אנושים כרת, כדכתיב, ולפתח אוהל מועד לא הביאו. So Rashi says the punishment is karet. Where do I learn this? Because in Sefer Barikra we learned that if somebody shechts an animal as a sacrifice outside of the Mishkan, he's chayav karet. So Rashi says shechting an animal and making a barbecue in the desert is like sacrificing it to avodah zara. The same punishment from the same pasuk. That's the shita of Rashi. Okay? Now Tosafot attacks Rashi and says, this doesn't make sense. This pasuk has nothing to do with basar ta'ava. Says Tosafot, kashe, hahu kra lo ayre ela bekotim b'shchutei chutz. So how do you connect it into this? And then Tosafot continues and questions Rashi from the sugya. Because remember, the sugya asked, how do we know in Rabbi Yishmael that you're allowed to eat tzvi and Yael? There was a hava amina in Rabbi Yishmael that even those will be asur. Says Tosafot, if Rabbi Yishmael learned his isur from this pasuk of shchutei chutz, the question would never arise. Why? Because this whole problem of sacrificing outside of the Mishkan is only in the animals that you can bring them as a korban. And since tzvi and Yael can never be part of the world of sacrificing obviously it would be mutter. So if Rashi is right, that part on the Gemara was not supposed to be written at all. And that's the kushia of Tosafot. Let's see. Again, we'll return to that Gemara. Tosafot looks at this Gemara and says, Rashi, you're wrong because the Hava Amina doesn't make any sense. The Hava Amina is maybe you can't eat Tzvi and Yael. And Tosafot says, if Rashi is right, this Hava Amina never existed. So obviously Rashi is wrong because the Gemara wrote this passage. Okay, so this is a kushia of Tosafot and Rashi. Let's sum this up. They're both cholek on how to understand the Shita of Rabbi Yishmael. According to Rashi, again, if you don't abide the rule, you're chayav karet, and we learned that from the pasuk of Shchut Echutz. And Tosafot says, no, this doesn't make sense. This pasuk is irrelevant. Obviously, you're not chayav karet. Why are you chayav? You're chayav love. It's a love. It's like any other achalot asurot, nevila, trefa. There are other loving. Okay, this is just a love. And where does he come that from? Because he's reading the sugya and saying, Rashi, you can't read the sugya. That's a problem in your sheet. Okay, so before we'll discuss Rashi and we'll go into Rashi's shita presently, let's look at Tosafot. So what is Tosafot claiming here? According to Rabbi Yishmael, the whole problem with these korbanot is not about the mikdash. It's a love like any other kashrut rule we have. So it seems that the problem is that we have too much taiva and we have to keep our taiva at bay. Now, if that is true, we have two questions to ask Tosafot and Savara. One, if the problem is taiva, why would there be a difference between eating tzvi and Yael than eating house animals? Okay, why is there a difference? There's taiva here, there's taiva there. And another thing is, if it's a problem of taiva, how can coming into Eretz Yisrael solve that problem? Why? There's less taiva in Eretz Yisrael? That's hard to accept. So let's look at each question at a time. Somebody who gives an answer to why is there a difference in tava between tzvi and Yael and shor kesef ve'ez, between behemot and chayot, is the shach on the Torah. Okay, the Shach on the Torah Parashat Dvarim is bothered by that question, and then he goes into a very interesting passage, and he says, really, if you read Sefer Bereshit slowly, you will see that no one of the Avot ever ate meat of house animals. He says, Adam HaRishon didn't eat meat. Avraham shechted a cow for the Malachim, but he didn't eat it because it says in the Torah that he was standing outside. He didn't eat it. And also Yitzchak, when he wanted to eat meat, he sends Esav to go and capture an animal out in the wild. Why isn't he sending him to where Rivka went to give him food from his own flock? So obviously, Yitzchak didn't want to eat his own flock. And also when Rivka is cooking food for him, she takes dafka izim and not a cow. Why is that? Because she knows that Yitzchak doesn't want the house animals, and izim can seem to be wild animals. And also, says the Shach, you can see that Yaakov didn't eat meat, and also Yosef and his brothers didn't eat meat. So, and then you can read this passage, it's very interesting, and he explains why. And this is the answer, according to the Shach. Why didn't the Avot eat meat? Lefisha basar, I mean, the meat of cows and the meat of the animals that you bring as sacrifices. Lefisha habasar, משמן ומעדן הגוף, אי אפשר לעבוד השם מתוך עידון ולבוא לידי שכחת הבורא יתברך, שנאמר, וישמן ישורון ויבעט. So says the Shach, eating house animals, that makes you really gavtan. It's easy to meet, it's fattening, and you become fat and you become a Baal Gaiva, and that can make you go against God. So that's why eating meat has to be connected either to the world of Kodesh, it has to be sacrificed in order to be eaten, or for Shabbos or Yom Tov, and if you're sick, you can eat it. But you can't just eat meat, stuff like that. So the Shach is giving an explanation why there's a difference between Tzvi and Yael and Behemot. But the question just becomes harder on the second question we had on Tosafot. Okay, let's say this is true. Let's say this is what Tosafot also thinks. But the Shach himself said, "Vayishmani shurun vayivat." That's in Shirat Azinu. Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael became fat and went against God. Is that an accident? Is there no taiva in Eretz Yisrael for these things? Obviously there is. So if that's the story, how come coming to Eretz Yisrael is matir to eat this meat, which is so dangerous? There's no less taiva. Actually, that's the problem in Eretz Yisrael, so it seems. So the Shita of Tosafot, even though he convinced us maybe in reading the Gemara, is very hard in Savara. So if I'll summarize what we saw, there's a machloket between Rashi and Tosfot how to understand the chumrah of what happens if you're shecht an animal in the desert. And Rashi says it's connected to shchutei chutz and your chayav karet. Tosfot says no, that can't be. It's not connected. And we asked two questions on the Tosfot. Why would there be a difference between chayot and behemot? We gave the shach as an answer, but even in that answer, we have a harder question. Why, if that's the story, are we being matir this isur when we're coming to Eretz Yisrael? So Tosfot asked Rashi, he said, Rashi, you're not reading the sugya correctly. The Rishonim preferred Rashi's shita. And why? Because they found other places in the Tanaim, in the Midrash, and Braisos, that it sounds as if Rashi is right, that the punishment is correct. So that's why they prefer him. And what we'll see now is that the Rashba finds a way to read the sugya in order for it to work well with Rashi's reading. Okay, so the Rashba here, I won't read him inside, I'll just explain from the other side. The Rashba says, so you didn't understand Rashi, when he commented on Rabbi Yishmael and Daf Tetzayin, it was because he read the Gemara in Daf Yud Zayin, and he's just bringing you the conclusion of the Gemara earlier, which is how Rashi works many times. So actually, at that point of time in Tetzayin, when Rabbi Yishmael was quoted, the Gemara didn't know then that the deen of being shechting an animal outside is correct. It learned it from Daf Yud Zayin. So according to Rashba, this is how you are to read Daf Yud Zayin. The Hava Amina is before the Gemara understood that this Isur is only regarding sacrificed animals. And that's why the Hava Amina was that there'll be Asur, also the animals. Because if you think it's a problem of Taiva, there shouldn't be a difference. And even though the Shach explained there is, that doesn't make much sense. There's Taiva here, there's Taiva there. But conclusion, we actually leave that path and reach a new conclusion that this Isur has nothing to do with Taiva. So it seems. It has to do with something with sacrificing. So the Rashba is saving Rashi from Tosfot's questions. And he also is opening us our minds to think that maybe Rashi has a different svara than Tosfot altogether. Meaning, why would there be a difference between behemot and chayot? Maybe the problem is avodah zarah, meaning we're afraid that people will use the animals of their home to be sacrificed to avodah zarah. And that's the problem. And that's why only on these animals we have this special isur of not shechting them and eating them stam kacha, because we're afraid it will be like avodah zarah. Now Rashi didn't say this. This is a thought that comes into our mind after we read the Rashba. And the one who did say it is actually the Rambam. Okay? The Rambam sees that as a problem, and he helps or tries to answer the question that we asked Tosafot. Remember, we asked Tosafot, we said, Tosafot, you said this is about Taiva. Why is Taiva in Eretz Yisrael suddenly mutar? Now, if the problem is as we offered in Rashi, avodah zarah, we have a similar question. Why is coming to Eretz Yisrael solving the problem of avodah zarah? There's, of course, a problem of avodah zarah in Eretz Yisrael. Actually, that's, again, why we were kicked out of Eretz Yisrael, one of the reasons. So Rashi doesn't say anything of this. It's all like ideas. But the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim actually explains the deen this way. And he also explains why coming to Eretz Yisrael solves the problem of avodah zarah. But his explanation is really hard to accept. I'll go over it quickly. The Rambam says, in the desert, there was a specific kind of avodah zarah that was problematic. Am Yisrael was being makriv to the seirim. The seirim are demons of the desert. They're demons that are around empty places. They don't exist in cities or in Mekomot Yishuv. So in the desert, there was more of a chance that Am Yisrael would do the specific avodah zarah. So that's why it was asur for them to shecht outside of the Mishkan. But coming to Eretz Yisrael, the problem lessened because Eretz Yisrael is not a desert. So these demons of the desert don't exist here. So it's not as dangerous. Now, I don't know if this makes sense to you. This is a Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, and he himself also is not fully satisfied with his explanation because he says, in bottom line, it's because you're far from the temple. Since Rashi didn't say this, I think we should look for a different answer in Rashi. So let's do another short sum up. According to Tosafot, the problem was taiva. According to the Rambam, the problem was avodah zarah. Tosafot didn't give us an answer how taiva changes in Eretz Yisrael and why taiva is less in Eretz Yisrael. It's unclear. And according to the Rambam, he gave an answer why avodah zarah is less in Eretz Yisrael, but I don't know if that's something that really sits with us. And Rashi didn't say A and didn't say B. So maybe we can find a different way in Rashi. So actually, I want to go on a path of understanding Rashi, and I want to look at Rashi and the Torah, how he explains what happens in Eretz Yisrael, why suddenly in Eretz Yisrael it's mutar, and maybe through what he says there, we can understand this Shita. So if we look at Rashi and the Torah, he actually says something that makes much sense. Rashi explains, Ki alchiv Hashem et gvulecha kasher diber lach, ואמרת אוכלה בשר, כי תביא נפשך לאכול בשר, ובכל עבד נפשך תאכל בשר. Okay, this is a pasuk that is matir, the isur that we had in the desert. So Rashi says, כי ירחיב, לימדה תורה דרך ארץ, שלא יתווה אדם לאכול בשר, אלא מתוך אחוות ידיים ואושר. So this is very unclear. Rashi says, it's derech eretz to eat basar when you are rich. And that's why it's mutar in Eretz Yisrael. It's very hard. Many Perushim of Rashi ask, how is this connected? The Torah didn't talk about being wealthy. It talked about just being far away. Where's Rashi bringing this from? And also, this is not connected in any manner to what Rashi said in Shas. So is he contradicting himself? And where did he get this wealth issue from? So these are many questions that are asked about Rashi in the Torah. And the Kli Yakar, which is one of the Chronim on the Torah, he quotes a Gemara in Chullin Pei Daled that it sounds as if Rashi is actually quoting that Gemara. Now, he brings that Gemara and he says that he has a better answer than Rashi. Now, we'll look at what he says and then we'll look at the Gemara in its originality and see that I think that this is actually a Gemara that Rashi is quoting. So the Kli Yakar goes like the Shach, and he also thinks that the Avot did not eat meat of cows and behemoth. And he says that actually, it says in Chullin, וזה שאמר, אך כאשר יאכל את הצבי ואת היעל כן תאכלנו, וכמו שנאמר שם, כי יצוד ציד חיה או עוף, ואמרו חז"ל, לימדה תורה דרך ארץ שלא יאכל אדם בשר, כי אם בהזמנה הזו. So the Shach here is saying, why were we allowed to eat tzvi and ayal or birds? Like, why is that allowed? So says the Kli Yakar, in Chullin it says that it's just harder to get meat that way. Okay, if in order to get meat you have to catch an animal in the wild, it means that the chances of you eating meat are much less than if you're taking your house animal and shechting it. And actually, this is the Torah teaching us derech eretz, that even if you are taking your personal animal, eat it at about the same amount as you would be eating meat if you had to go and actually catch an animal in the wild. It shouldn't be something that you do on a regular basis. Even that's mutar for you. That's derech eretz. You have to take the meat and always eat it less than how you can. Even though you can eat more, if you're allowed to eat your home animals, eat less as if you have to hunt in the wild. And why is that important? Because it's not good to eat meat every day. It's not good. So you have to make believe as if your house animal is like an animal that you had to actually hunt. So that's what the Kli Yakar says. And he was quoting this Gemara. Now, if we'll look at the Gemara, in Chullin and Pei Daled. So we'll see that actually the Gemara, if we continue reading it, is talking about being rich. Okay, so the Gemara started from what the Kli Yakar quoted, "Limdat Torah derech eretz shelo yochal adam be'ema ela b'azmana hazo." So the Torah is teaching us by saying that you can eat tvin Yael and you can't eat behemot unless you bring them as a korban. It teaches us that if you hunt, that's okay because that is not a lot of meat. You'll eat it rarely. And continues the Gemara and says, "Limdat Torah derech eretz shelo yochal adam basar ela leteavon." יכול לקח מן השוק ויאכל, תלמוד לומר וזבחת מבקרך ומצונך, יכול לזבח כל בקרו ויאכל כל צונו ובקרו, ויאכל, תלמוד לומר מבקרך ולא כל ברכה, מצונך ולא מצונך. So, the Brisa continues and says, the Torah is telling you, even if you can take a house animal, don't buy it in the shuk. You have to take your own animal. That will give you a reason not to shech too much. And even if you do shech, take a little bit and not a lot. And then continues the Gemara and says that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah thinks, because of this, that even if you have money, first you buy vegetables, then you buy fish, then, only then you buy meat. So eating meat, even if you have money, is really supposed to be something rare, like once a week, when on Shabbos. So Rav says we should be lachosh ledivrei zaken. You really should do this. And Rabbi Yochanan says that's true. You have to do it if you're healthy. If you're not healthy, you can eat meat every day with the little money that you have. Get meat because you can eat it for your health. But if you're healthy, you have to eat meat rarely. So it looks as if the Gemara is saying this. Originally, there is a natural way of keeping humans at bay from eating too much meat. If humans can eat only wild animals, they would not eat a lot of meat. It would be rare. So now that you can eat your animals, act as if artificially they're wild animals and use your wealth in a way of understanding that this is not the first thing that you buy. It's like the last thing that you buy, and you have to do it really rarely. So now we can go back to Rashi and understand that this is actually what Rashi said. And Rashi quoted this Gemara, "Limdat Torah derech eretz shelo yochal ela be'ashirut," meaning only when you're really rich you can buy meat. So keep the meat as something that's really for a special occasion. Now, can we connect Rashi here to Rashi in Shas? So I want to try to go in that direction. So in order to do that, I'll return to Rav Shmuel Shimoni, my husband, that had an idea about this machloket. We already quoted him a little in the beginning. So he had a way of explaining Rabbi Yishmael, and I want to take what he's saying and actually slightly refine it to help us understand Rashi and offer like the chiddush I have in the sugya. So I'm reminding you that the way Rav Shmuel analyzed Rabbi Akiva, he said, according to Rabbi Akiva, Eretz Yisrael makes Am Yisrael more holy, and it creates even our regular eating of meat into something that's close to sacrificing it. Eretz Yisrael is adding kedusha to our everyday lives. And Rabbi Yishmael, it was very strange. Like, what is he saying? So Rav Shmuel Shimoni offered this, that in the world of Rabbi Yishmael, when you're in the desert, the way Torah looks is either you're doing something kedusha or it's avodah zarah. Okay, it's either really good or really bad. It's very, very dichotomy. It's black and white. If you're eating meat and bringing it as a korban, it's good, and if it's not a korban, it's like avodah zarah. But coming to Israel, according to Rabbi Yishmael, what happens when you come into Eretz Yisrael? Eretz Yisrael creates a gray area. Okay, Eretz Yisrael is a place where the world of reshut, of chol, exists. In the desert, there's no chol. It's either kodesh or avodah zarah. Eretz Yisrael gives us this whole world of no kedusha, where you can choose what to do with it. It's not avodah zarah, but it's not also kodesh. It's somewhere in between, and that's the chiddush of Eretz Yisrael. So that's Rav Shmuel's idea of explaining Rabbi Yishmael, and we have a question on his shita. If that's true, that the whole idea of this gray area exists only in Eretz Yisrael, there's a problem because according to Rabbi Yishmael, in the desert you can eat tzvi ve'ayal, so it's not that the desert doesn't have a gray area, it's much smaller. So you could say, okay, there was a tiny area of reshut in the desert and it expanded in Eretz Yisrael, but there was something like, it's a little hurting the Savara, which is a very beautiful Savara of explaining Rabbi Yishmael. So I want to work with this Savara and slightly change it, and I think it can fit what we saw in Rashi in a beautiful way. Again, Rabbi Akiva thinks that coming to Eretz Yisrael makes us more holy. What does Rabbi Yishmael think? So I want to offer this. In the desert, we were people who were enslaved, and God took us out of slavery, and He wanted us to control our ta'avot. So in the desert, He didn't trust us to do it on our own. And since He knew that if we have house animals and we will be allowed to eat them, we will just pig out on them, just eat them all the time. So He used the strongest rule He had to keep us at bay, Isur Karet. And as Rashi said, it's not about Avodah Zarah, it's just saying it's really, really, really Asur. But once we come to Eretz Yisrael, it's already after we have grown. And here, God is expecting us to use Derech Eretz, which is what Rashi quoted in his Pasuk on the Torah. He's quoting the Gemara in Chullin Pei Daled, Limdat Torah Derech Eretz. Meaning, when we get into Eretz Yisrael, we're supposed to become responsible adults. And instead of having God keep us at bay, we're expected to keep ourselves at bay using Derech Eretz, because God is giving us in Eretz Yisrael much higher expectations. He's saying, you're not child anymore. I'm not the one who's holding you back. You have to learn to hold yourself back. And that's the Chiddush in Eretz Yisrael, that God is actually taking a step back and letting us try on our own. After He gave us the original teachings, now we need to work on ourselves with our own means. So that's a very big difference between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, because according to Rabbi Akiva, we're working with God's tools. And here, according to Rabbi Yishmael, God gave us a very strong tool in the desert because we were too weak. And now we've grown and we have to work on our own tools. Now, this idea might sound a little far for you, but first of all, it works with Rashi very well. But I also found it in the Sfat Emes. The Sfat Emes in Parashat HaMeraglim tries to explain why the Meraglim didn't want to come into Eretz Yisrael. And the Sfat Emes has his way throughout his book, all of his commentary, any Avera that you have in Chumash, he gives an explanation to why it actually came from a good motivation. And he's Melamed Zchut always. So when he comes to be Melamed Zchut on the Meraglim, he says, why did the Meraglim didn't want to come to Eretz Yisrael? And he quotes the Zohar saying that the Meraglim felt they were heads and they didn't want to lose being heads. And he's saying, how does that make sense? Why is that a good thing? And he's explaining the Meraglim didn't think about themselves. They thought about their entire generation. The generation of Am Yisrael in the desert were Am Melumad Benisim. They got the Torah. They had a lot of God intervention in their lives. They were very, very close to God. God was holding them all the time. God was the one who was killing them when they were bad and was giving them man, and they were totally connected to God. And they were afraid to go into Eretz Yisrael because going into Eretz Yisrael means that God takes a step back. And they were frightened from that because they were afraid that we'll lose their Kedusha, because it will take a step back from God, because God will take a step back from them. And that's why they didn't want to go into Eretz Yisrael. And the Sfat Emes says that it's the similar problem that the neshama has when it is sent into its body here in this world. He says, בוודאי מישהו במקום עליון קשה לו ליפול למדרגה תחתונה, כמו שקשה לנשמה לרדת למטה, ובעל כורחו אדם נברא. So being afraid of coming into Eretz Yisrael is the same fear that the neshama has coming into this world, because the neshama is connected to God, meets God every day, part of the Kisei HaKavod, and suddenly has to go and do its own work alone in this world That's frightening because that's really actually losing Kedusha in a sense, but it's really what God wants us to do. He wants us to work on our own. So this idea that I'm offering as an explanation in Rashi, I found here in this Faremes. And that's how I would like to conclude this shiur. So we saw this machloket between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. We saw that Rabbi Yishmael's shita is really hard to understand. We saw Tosafot's ideas, we saw Rambam's ideas, and I try to offer a new way of reading Rashi explaining the shita of Rabbi Yishmael. And according to him, coming into Eretz Yisrael, according to Rabbi Yishmael again, is actually taking a distance from God and trying to work with their Eretz to keep ourselves at bay after God helped us understand what's good and what's bad. So that's a big etgar of coming to Eretz Yisrael, according to Rabbi Yishmael. And again, according to Rabbi Akiva, it's a different story. So I'm really interested what you think about this idea. I'll be happy to hear any comments. I really enjoyed this Gefet because I learned something new. It's a Chedesh now for Shavuot. And I want to say Chag Sameach for Shavuot. All of you have a lot to celebrate. All the learning of Daf Yomi for working every single day and reaching these beautiful goals that you are reaching. So I'm honored to be learning with you, and I hope you'll continue learning. And B'ezrat Hashem, your Shavuot will be healthy and happy and a real celebration of Torah and of Eretz Yisrael. So take care. Chag Sameach.